Greetings, everyone. Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of The
The
Monsters Den. We've
Ooh.
got in the co-captain's chair tonight for this trip down memory lane, Dan Brown and Davy Gallagher, all the way from Scotland and the Hudson Valley here in Nueva York. What's going on, guys?
Hey, still alive and well. Got my days mixed up, but I'm good.
Ooh, yeah. For those of you watching, we had to record this a day early this week because normally on Thursday nights we do Monster Day and we record on Thursday nights. But actually, when you guys are watching this on Thursday night, I will be in Brooklyn, New York at the Merciful Fate Creator Show listening to some headbanging heavy metal music. So we're doing it a day early here, but you guys are seeing it in the normal time slot. So
and it is Thursday for me anyway, so we're all kind of in flux.
that's right. It is Thursday for Davey because Davey is like
8
million hours ahead of Dan and I.
That's right. And I'll tell you the lottery numbers.
We're all good.
Yeah. Good. So as we have mentioned in last week's episode, and we've been talking about it for a few weeks, two very, very special Blu-ray releases have just come out on the Warner Archive collection. And first time on Blu-ray for both of these films, we've got, there you have it.
There you go.
We've got Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1931, starring Frederick March, and Mark of the Vampire, starring Lionel Barrymore, Bela Lugosi, Lionel Atwell, and crew from 1935. And these are films that the three of us have seen many, many, many times, and I've owned these films and many different formats and things. But as we get more and more of these classic movies from the 30s and 40s and 50s on high definition, Blu-rays or 4Ks, it's kind of nice to watch these films not all scratchy and super grainy and whatnot. So I will say that the wait was well worth it. These both look fantastic. We're going to go one film at a time. We're going to talk about the movies a bit and talk about, the quality of the HD and whatever kind of tidbits we want to throw out there. So we're going to start with the most notable of the two first, and we're going to start chronologically here. So we got Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, 1931, basically a remake of the John Barrymore silent film, which came out, exactly, what was that, 8 years before?
1920, I think.
1920, okay.
So 20,
Yeah, which is a fantastic film. One of the great silent horror classics if you haven't seen it. But this is a Ruben Mamoulian, is that how he says his last name?
Yes, indeed, the director of Mark of Zorro with Tyrone Power.
That's right. So, Davey, why don't you kickstart us off here and your impressions of this film after seeing it, probably hundreds of times or however many. I've watched this film many times over the years, but now seeing it for the first time on Blu-ray, high def, what were your kind of reactions?
So first of all, just in general, being a film fan and someone who collects all sorts of movies, Warner Archive just always hits it out the park. They don't have a massive budget, but there was a period a couple of years, not even a couple of years ago, but 18 months ago, where it looks as though they were going to go out of business. Warner were pulling funding with the takeovers and whatnot. So great to see that they've been able to keep going, because if we didn't get stuff like this, because Warner, unlike a lot of studios, preserved their stuff immaculately. And that's why we can have these amazing prints and they look stunning. So even when we don't always get new features, though there is a new commentary on this in particular, but even when they're not stacked with special features, they are always world-class restorations. They'll look pristine. So this is a treat to watch. It's like watching that recent Marvel werewolf thing that was on. It just looks like a modern film turned black and white. It looks that fresh. It looks absolutely gorgeous. To go into the film itself, first of all, I love that they use the proper pronunciation. It's the only adaptation I can think of that goes with Jekyll and Hyde rather than J, because that is the Scottish pronunciation. And Robert Louis Stevenson,
it's Jekyll, not Jekyll.
Yes, Robert Louis Stevenson would always correct people and tell them it was Jekyll. But it's funny for this film that did catch on. It was a big hit. It was a critical and box office smash, but the Jekyll thing never lasted.
No.
I think Spencer Tracy got rid of that. But this is a remarkable film, I think. One of the most stunning looking films of the period. For the time, considering that this is, and we'll go into the director of the next film in particular, but as I mentioned, Ruben Mamoulian directed loads of films, bit of a journeyman, but not a massively famous name, although Mark of Zorro is considered a great classic adventure film. But you would never know what to think of this. You would think that the guy that did this must be some great master, because to me, this is up there with James Whale's work on the first two Frankenstein movies. For an early sound picture, this has no right to be as wonderfully shot and look as gorgeous as it is. Frederick March had that quality that Laurence Olivier had, which was very unusual for early sound pictures, where he was brilliant at playing the everyman. Whereas a lot of actors in that period were struggling to come to terms with sound because they were so used to not having to use the voice at all, or be on Broadway and things where they had to speak to the back row and enunciate, bellow. So they weren't used to being kind of quiet and whispery and, everyman and subtle. There was no subtlety in a lot of 1930, 31, 32. Frederick March had that straight out the bat. He's a wonderful, wonderful Dr. Jekyll, Henry Jekyll. Jekyll, I should say. See, it even got me doing it.
I get it right, David.
Jekyll, rhymes with treacle. But he's a wonderful doctor. I'm just going to say Jekyll because he'll just keep falling over myself if I don't. He's a wonderful Dr. Jekyll and a phenomenal Mr. Hyde. It's the first time we've seen a Mr. Hyde. There has been a couple of adaptations, as mentioned, John Barrymore, but there was also a shorter one-reeler, I think, from 1912. Yeah. And this was the first time where somebody attempted the transformation sequence. And as we know, that can be very hit or miss depending on who's in charge. So although Ruben Mamoulian is the guy who directs this, the guy who is the cinematographer who gets the credit for it is, let me just double check, I've got James Wong Howe. He was a Chinese-born cinematographer, which was quite unusual for the time, working in Hollywood. And he was the one that came up with the idea of do it with lenses. If we do it with shadow and light, so you can never do this in color. If we have red and green, it uses the same theory as 3D, essentially, with the different colored glasses, where if they change, so Frederick March would have looked ridiculous sitting there in color in real life, but if they change the lens gradually, then shadows are revealed in different shades of red and or green that make him look as if his face is all of a sudden completely changing before your eyes. It's a remarkable transformation sequence. It holds up to this day. Jekyll and Hyde is a property that in various versions, the transformation sequence has to be quite remarkable to kind of take you into this rather fantastical idea. I think one of the other best versions is Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, where that's done so seamlessly. I still can barely see where it turns from Ralph Bates into Martine Beswick. Yeah. But this, all done with him just like this, almost as if he's sitting on Zoom. That's how intimate it is, right in his face. So there's no great secrets. It's not done with, over the shoulder where, there's massive cuts or anything. It's all right in his face. There is one terrific cut where it shows you his hand growing the hair. And then when it cuts back, there's a bit more stuff being applied to his face. And that's done so seamlessly as well. So it's a remarkable achievement in special effects cinema. It's up there with the likes of Chambers' work in Planet of the Apes and things later on. Pierce's work on Frankenstein.
Definitely influenced Jack Pierce's work on the Man and Frank stuff for sure. Yeah.
Real masters. And I think Rick Baker cites it as one of his real favorites as well. So it's an influential film in terms of what it did effects wise. It's an influential film in terms of what it did just cinema wise, because Frederick March, and this was unthinkable now, was an Oscar winner for this performance. And the idea that the Jekyll and Hyde film would provide you with the best actor Oscar, although he shared it with what was it? It was
Wallace Beery, the champ.
Yes, it was the champ, Wallace Beery, which such a bizarre system they used back in the day. If you were within 3 votes of each other, you shared the awards. Whatever happened to?
No sharing nowadays, man.
Yeah. Will Smith would just punch you in the face and steal your Oscar.
They shared it because Wallace Beery had like a temper tantrum.
Yeah, well, he got less votes. He got less votes, so it shouldn't have got the Oscar. But Frederick March is the one that people remember. It's a bit like Wings being the first Oscar winner, or is it Sunrise? The F.W. Murnau film. And one thing to mention about this is our effects man here, James Wong Howe, also worked on Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, and that too plays around with filters. And that was a late silent film. Looks absolutely gorgeous. So it really is a case of, this is an early example of a film that works as a visual piece in that sound era, where the director of the next film that will come to, Todd Browning, his Dracula, which came out the same year as this, it's very stagey. It's very flat. It's very, there's not a lot in it that couldn't just be done on a stage, on a theatrical bent. And Dracula came from the Dracula play rather than just the Stoker novel. So that's fine. But it just shows you that real craftsmen this early on did exist, and they could make remarkable films. It was, the popular opinion that it would be years later, and like Orson Welles with Forced Perspective and Greg Toland and things. No, there was masterful filmmaking in the very early sound era as well. And this is just a stunning example of it. In terms of the actual performances, I love that it kind of throws away the book a little bit. It stays true to the spirit of Jekyll and Hyde, but it comes up with its own supporting cast to kind of slimline it a little bit. A bit like we were saying that the first Dracula film did for Hammer, where it takes the most important parts, but then it just streamlines the other parts. And it goes to some dark places, because this is pre-code. What the Hays Code was 1934, I want to say, something like that. And it didn't really get taken seriously for a couple of years after that anyway. But in this, there are quite on the nose rape scenes, really, you have to say.
Murder and the sadistic nature of Hyde's character. A lot of
and
in this film.
Gleeful. This isn't like the Spencer Tracy one. I mean, there's a reason we didn't cover the Spencer Tracy one. It's more of a kind of, if you can have this, a romantic version of Jekyll and Hyde. Whereas this, he is a total monster when he becomes Hyde. It is the true nature of evil. You almost have to look past the makeup in some places, because when he walks into the pub, you just think, why are people not running for their lives? It looks like a Neanderthal's just turned up. These teeth. Those
fucking teeth, man. Imagine looking over like, whoa.
Yeah, it looks like, I don't know, it looks like Animal from the Muppets or something. I mean, it's just insane with Austin Powers' teeth. But again, a great juxtaposition, and they intentionally made Frederick March look even more ridiculously film star matinee idol to contrast that. He's got the kind of almost the Clark Kent bop going on. He's got in his hair and everything as well. It's great. They intentionally really made sure that he was matinee idol looks. And then, boom, that contrasts massively with how depraved and horrible. And again, that ties into I, Am Monster, the Amicus version of Jekyll and Hyde, where they take a lot of the look of this particular version of Jekyll. And that's where the Christopher Lee one really comes from. But I'd also highlight the performance of one of the great actresses of this period, who time's not been terribly kind to because she didn't make that many films later on. But Miriam Hopkins, she is an absolute fireball. She's the more firecracker of the two main leads. She was in Trouble in Paradise, which is one of the best films of the early 1930s, the Ernst Lubitsch screwball comedy, one of the defining screwball comedies, and one of the just finest actresses going. And they make a great double act there. And what happens to her here is just so brutal and horrible. And it's almost a struggle to believe that this was 1931. Even though we know it's pre-code, wow, they really were pushing the envelope even for then, because it's absolutely deplorable what you see on screen, and it doesn't pull away. It's not implied. It's not inferred. Everything is there on the screen. But yeah, those would be my kind of overall thoughts. I mean, it's just a terrific version of Robert Louis Stevenson's The Master. Treasure Islands and Kidnapped and whatnot. But this is probably his most famed work now, especially in the horror lexicon. And I think personally, this is the best version of Jekyll and Hyde. This is by far this to me, like I said about Dracula 58, is the definitive Jekyll and Hyde. This is, if I only have one, this is the one that I'm taking with me into the desert island, probably with a Blu-ray player, I suppose. But yeah,
have to,
yeah.
Dan, your take on this film?
Well, for starters, as Davy was saying before, technically, when you think about it, if you look at the static camera movements of films made in the 1930 or 31, and particularly Dracula, this film has incredible fluid camera movements.
Yeah.
I mean, from the opening sequence where they have Dr. Jekyll's, and okay, Jekyll, because that's what I always said my entire life, how it's his point of view. As he leaves the house, you get an introduction of his living, his statuary, the opulence in which he lives, goes out to the carriage, and it's his viewpoint. And this would not be done until, this was innovative. And this was not done until years later when George Montgomery played Philip Marlowe, I think it was, in Lady in the Lake, when the entire film is from his point of view. And the only time you see him is what they do also in Dr. Jekyll. He looks in the mirror. And that's the only time you see, Robert Montgomery's face. But that being said, getting off into the story itself, Miriam Hopkins, who was not nominated for an Academy Award, her performance is so horrifying, because you see, this is a woman obviously being pre-code. She is the lady of the night. She has dealt with countless men, from dirty sailors to opulent businessmen. And she's gone the gamut. Yet in this period of time, which I can't really say what the timeline is, you see that, and she's hard. She's a hard-nosed woman. And you see how Jekyll degrades her to the point where she's like a whimpering child. I mean, he has beaten her. He obviously brutally rapes her. That's implied. It's no secret. And of course, this is a film that screams pre-code. And it is a masterwork on many levels. And it was one of those films, and it came from Paramount. And Paramount, one thing about it is that MGM was glossy, and was there more stars than there are in heaven. But they didn't delve into the horror that much. They had the sets. They had incredible sets and so forth. Universal had it down to a science with a limited budget. But Paramount really, when they did their films, such as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Murders in the Zoo, Islands of Lost Souls, I mean, they bit into horror. And they made some horrific things in these films. And this film does not fail to, to please you. The interesting thing about this film, as we had mentioned, is that, MGM was a studio that is one that kept everything. I mean, they archive their stuff, and other than studio fires, most of their library was intact. And the thing about it, by being intact, they were control freaks. And Jekyll and Hyde, as you know, disappeared for about almost 40 years before it was re-released. But this is not the only soul situation. I mean, at one point when they were going to make the film Gaslight in 1943 or 44 with Ingrid Bergman, they went out to buy the rights to an English version.
To the British version, yeah.
And they did destroy prints. They plan was to destroy it, and only a handful of privately owned 16 millimeter rental copies existed. That's the only way we'd ever see that film. William K. Everson, who wrote a book which mentions also Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, called Classics of the Horror Film, which is back in the 70s. And this is how some of us old timers used to be able to research film before the internet, and that in Famous Monsters magazine. He was going to, in 1959, when MGM was going to release Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston, William K. Everson, who was a respected professor of film historian, one of the pioneers in film preservation, turned around, was going to be doing a screening of the 1925 version that also MGM also owned. MGM went to the extent of putting in a cease and desist to him to show it. If he were to show the film, they were going to have him arrested. I can't recall if he ever was arrested, but there were a lot of threats made. Well, the case of with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, they bought it outright because in reality, they followed the script verbatim in the Spencer Tracy version. And they just changed it according, of course, like postcode, you couldn't do this. And I've always referred to although Spencer Tracy, one of the greatest American actors in stage and in screen, I always referred to his version as a sober Spencer Tracy and Spencer Tracy on a bender. And that's how explained his two sides. And the only reason I believe that they did not destroy the Paramount version is because it was an Academy Award-winning film. But they did bury it away for 30 years. The only time it was seen was in the mid-30s, and they had taken out about 12 minutes of it. And those 12 minutes, which are mostly the middle section with Miriam Hopkins, they reinstated when they restored it. But they had kind of toned it down. But overall, this is a masterwork. I mean, Frederick March, from the point of going out in the rain and acting like a child initially, and then turning into this brutal sadist. Miriam Hopkins' degradation from being a hardened hooker to going down to be a whimpering child. And as they say in the film, I can't remember the actress's name, but Dr. Jekyll's fiance is actually a strong female character. She stands.
Rose Herbert.
Yes, and she's a strong female. So this defies all the different, I would say, stereotypes in this film. And and Frederick March was known as kind of a romantic lead. As you said, he was in the Lawrence Lewis film. He was also in Death Takes a Holiday and so forth. And this was this is a real tour de force for him, and deservedly so. He won the Oscar. But the film stands the test of time, and I agree very much with what Davy said. This is, if you're going to put in what is the best Frankenstein version, what is the best Dracula version, what is this? This is certainly, bar none, the top-notch version. And they did make another version in 1920, the same year that they made The Barrymore by a low-budget company starring an actor by the name of Sheldon Lewis, I believe. I have yet to see that, and that's a full-length feature film. But this one stands the test of time. Transfer is absolutely stunning. I mean, I didn't see one speck on it. It was only out on VHS and then DVD as a twofer with Spencer Tracy's version.
Yeah, the red box. Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
don't have that.
Which is up for sale now on the internet. So
eBay.
No need for it. Yeah,
and it's it stands on its own. And if you're into buying film and you're into horror films, go out and buy this. It's not a break the bank scenario, and fantastic film. I love it, always have. And yeah, we knew it when I was younger. I knew it through Famous Monsters of Filmland because it was a lost film at that time, and all we saw were the stills. And of course, I wish, since I came here at the last minute, I could have brought out the great Basil Gogos painting that appeared in one of the issues of Famous Monsters in 1969 or 70. So there you go. I have it. Thumbs up.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give a couple thoughts here before we move on to the next film. To me, there are classic films of this era, classic monster films, Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolf Man, the Mummy, Invisible Man. Jekyll and Hyde is up there with those, in my opinion. This is as iconic as it gets from this time period. I agree with both of you. This is the best Jekyll and Hyde film ever made. For me, I think one of the most amazing things about this film is to see the evolution, or de-evolution, I should say, of the Hyde character throughout this film. You know, in the beginning, the first time or two that he turns into Mr. Hyde, he still looks fairly humanish. He's not quite as hairy. The teeth are there, the shadowy look. He's got this very simian-like looking gorilla skull cap head, which is really kind of strange looking. And that's like, you know, the slightly hairy hands, but otherwise, you know, and he's got these kind of like mannerisms, you know, like the first couple times he turns, everything is very, you know, shaking his head, and it's just it's very simian, which I think is the point of this whole thing. And then the more he turns into Hyde, the more he starts to de-evolutionize the character, and he becomes even more monstrous and more simian looking and more hair and more turning into like a Cro-Magnon, kind of like Neanderthal, right? Basically like a caveman almost. And I love watching that progression through the movie. And the more the film goes on, the more times he turns into Hyde, the more sadistic and violent he gets. So it's this kind of like descent. The whole film too is just like a descent into madness. You know, forget the whole monster part of it. It's a great kind of descent into someone's just absolute destruction. And you know that there's not going to be any happy ending to this film whatsoever. And the whole like second half of the film is very violent, and it's just wonderful filmmaking. And it's another one of those films that like. You know, very barren of like soundtrack, but it's okay. Whereas like you watch a film like Dracula that I think needed more of a soundtrack.
Yeah.
This one doesn't at all.
Well, the dialogue is good.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Itself is incredible, you know, and he goes from childlike to like at the end, his face is practically melting.
Yeah.
Something that maybe the audience doesn't know is that the first time he drinks his potion and he turns into Hyde, and then eventually, I don't know what the time span is, but eventually he will just get like the Hulk. He'd get annoyed.
And he turns
into Hyde. And next thing you know, all the shit hits the fan, and you know, everybody's running from the guy with the top hat and the cape and the, you know, bad teeth, which
and he's leaping off of things. I mean, the end is great. He's just, but again, like a runaway ape, right? He's agile, and he's things. It's like it's crazy.
And essentially, it's also pretty much about drug addiction, really.
Yes.
You know, the idea that the more you do it, the more you're never going to be able to give it up.
Great point.
You know, the first night may be fun. You may have a good time. Well, I shouldn't advocate that. So I should rephrase that. That's parable. I'm not condoning anything here. This video brought to you by the heroin industry of the United States. No. It starts out, you know, hey, this is not too bad, and I got to explore a different side of myself. And every time, as you say, every time does it becomes more obvious that you're not getting out again. You're just going down and down. And that's something we will see in future versions of Jekyll. But yeah.
Absolutely.
Wasn't there a rumor that Robert Louis Stevenson had dabbled with cocaine?
I'd be very surprised if a man of science like he was, in that period of enlightenment, didn't experiment. But
I mean, like Dr. Hoffman, let's take some LSD and go for a bicycle ride through Nazi occupied territory. Let's see how this.
Well, you know, he also wrote Treasure Island, but I don't think he was a pirate. So, you know, maybe he did just have a good imagination.
That's it too.
Yeah, who knows? All right, moving on to 1935. Todd Browning's Mark of the Vampire. Great cast, starring Lionel Barrymore, Bela Lugosi, Lionel Atwell, Elizabeth Allen, Jean Hersholt, and many more. Great ensemble cast. Atmospheric film. This was the second time that Bela Lugosi played a vampire in a film. This was he did not appear in the direct sequel to Dracula, and it was a couple of years before he donned the cape once again till this particular film. So, Davey, you want to kick us off on a little discussion of Mark of the Vampire?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating failure, and I used to think it was it was a much better film than Pete. You and I were discussing this briefly before we went on air. A much better film than I do think it is now. But there are other parts of it, if I completely ignore certain things that just don't work at all, that I absolutely adore. I mean, Lionel Barrymore's name is writ large at the top here, and there's a reason for that. He steals the show. The film was very much a pastiche of Dracula. Really, it goes for the whole Dracula mythos. It doesn't bother with setting up a lot of exposition. At least 15 minutes, apparently as much as 20, was completely cut from the film at one point. And it really shows, because this film just starts and the villagers are already going, you better get indoors, the vampires are out tonight. No, it's like, there's no setup. It's not like Dracula, where we'd have like just maybe the scared villager, and you wouldn't know what, Jonathan Harker would be worried why everybody was acting weird for 20 minutes. And gradually you'd find out things, and there's a creepiness. Now, straight away, we get very much, there's vampires here. We should all be terrified. There's definitely vampires. And here's a fake Van Helsing to help us try and defeat them. And in walks Lionel Barrymore, and just, I wouldn't say camps it up, but he certainly is playing to the back row. He's certainly saying, I think this is a bit of a silly one. I'm just going to have a bit of fun with this. And thank goodness he does, because some of the other acting, unfortunately, is atrocious. Even from normally reliable people. I think Lionel Atwell's actually quite bad in this, and I normally love Lionel Atwell.
He's like not impactful at all. You could have had any. I don't know how much they paid him to do this role.
Gestures with his mustache. That's about all.
Yeah, he has nothing to do in this film. Nothing.
Yeah. Whereas, essentially, this is, another one of the 1.5 million old dark house kind of movies that we've talked about, but with the most bizarre of twists, and not 100% unique, because there have been films that have done that before, The Cat and the Canary in the 20s and things. The film's a reasonably loose remake of the legendary what's it called, London After Midnight, by Todd Browning. Todd Browning, I have such a difficult relationship with, because I think he was a great silent director, and like I alluded to there, I don't think he could work in sound cinema at all. I think he was somebody who was very bad at finding a way to make things cinematic. Because obviously at that point you had to worry about, all of a sudden, mics had to be, on top of the actors, and silence on the sets and whatnot. Whereas before, in the silent era, the director could literally just shout at the actors, and because it would never get picked up anyway, just do this, do that. You could direct them live. Whereas his direction, even in Dracula, is always so flat and so staid. And I think that Dracula in particular really lucked out by having a charismatic actor like Lugosi, who just elevates that film much more than I think Todd Browning does, or Everett Van Sloan does, who I think is quite dull in that as well. Whereas you watch the Spanish version of Dracula with the same sets and the same production, and you see what an actual director can do with it. And that Mexican director didn't go on to a massive career or anything, but it was just a much more dynamic director. And Todd Browning, in this, again, shows that he's just a very flat director. Everything's done in a flat style, and the few moments that are a nice flourish are really just that. They don't seem like they're particularly... they're not scenes, put it that way. They are literally images. The vampire's daughter who looks like the girl from The Ring. The vampire's daughter, so Bela Lugosi's daughter in it, she comes in at one point with wings, and I don't mean like bat wings, but almost like that, but it looks like a sinister angel more than anything else. And that's a glorious image. But Todd Browning doesn't, that happens almost like halfway back in the set. That should be the focus. This should have a dramatic musical sting, and it should, just bizarre choices to not present the film as excitingly as it could come off. But Lionel Barrymore, every time he's on screen, just seems to say, okay, I think I better do some of the heavy lifting here because nobody else seems to be interested. So he seems to be much more engaged. I mean, some of his line deliveries, he is very much the Van Helsing stand-in, and I love it when he just starts barking orders, and complete with butler, maid. Like, it doesn't even pretend to know their names. Just butler, maid. And apparently quite a lot of comedy stuff was cut out with the butler and the maid, and that's where some of the 15 or 20 minutes just completely vanished from. But he is, and the names in it are quite bizarre as well. He's Professor Zelen, I think, and Lugosi is Count Bora, Count Mora. But spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it, but really we have to talk about it. You can't talk about this film and not go into it. It's a fake vampire film. It's not a vampire film at all. It turns out to be the most convoluted, nonsensical plot that you've ever seen in a murder mystery. To establish a murder that's been committed a year earlier, in comes Lionel Barrymore as what we think is Van Helsing, and turns out to be more of a Poirot type who's actually going to solve a murder from a year ago. And for some reason, he knows hypnotism, takes the potential killer, and they all seem to know he's the killer anyway, so I'm not really sure why we need any of this to happen. But it takes the killer and convinces him it's a year in the past, and vampires exist, and freaks them out into... I don't even know how you can possibly describe this and not make it sound as if you're just absolutely making it up and somebody would just go, no, that's not right.
It's quite puzzling, because basically the killer says, well, what I'll do is I'll make everybody believe that a family of vampires actually killed who I just killed, so I will be the clear. And then they're just going to hypnotize him and recreate the night so he admits everything that he does. What?
And yet everybody who's against the killer knows that that's the kind of thing he's doing, so they go into the vampire lore too, and complete with... I mean, Lionel Barrymore could just go in with hypnotism stuff and get this all solved in 5 minutes, presumably. But for some reason, he goes into full Van Helsing mode with you must put all these, it's not garlic in it, it's something else, wolfsbane or whatever. You must put this round the doors, and you must do this. And you think, why are you doing all this? This is completely ridiculous when you know that this is fake. It's like they're still keeping up the pretense even when he's on his own with people that he knows are not the killer. So why are you still keeping up the pretense that there's real vampires? So the fact that Bela Lugosi's in here, and indeed Lionel Atwill, is a complete misnomer. It is entirely, and the title itself, Mark of the Vampire, is to entice people to say this must be a vampire movie. I'll best see this. And then Bela Lugosi does nothing in this film at all. He does less than
a candle.
He lurks through
He lurks through walls. He's got a weird blood streak on his forehead that they never explained why.
Apparently, that came from the 15 minutes as well. Apparently, at one point, there was an incest plot and he was going to try and kill himself. And that's why... But he forgot he was a vampire, so he didn't actually die. And just stayed with this blood, gunshot wound in his head. And you think, well, why would they have this whole incest plot written to... I mean, it's as if somebody wrote them a script to be the vampires in the movie. It makes absolutely no sense. The more you think about it, the more this film just completely falls apart. And you have to almost take it as a farce, because it's the only way it works. You have to take it as Lionel Barrymore presents the Bela Lugosi comedy hour, because it just does not work any other way. There's stuff in here that just obviously they were at one point at least nominally making a horror film, and apparently Todd Browning did not tell the cast that it was a comedy until the end. He didn't tell them about the twist at the end, and he didn't tell Lugosi that you're going to have that awful scene at the end where he's going, what's the line again, where he says something like, "Oh, I'm the best vampire actor in the world." Gosh,
I have a new thing for the new act.
yeah, which, and it's not even a clever way to reference the fact that, oh, is he going to, is this a meta thing where he's actually playing Bela Lugosi, perhaps? You could have done something a bit more interesting with that, but they don't. It's like every opportunity in this to do something interesting is completely missed, but the opportunities are all there. I think there's a really clever idea in here, but almost, it's like the whole turn left and you create a different reality. It's like every single decision they made here, they turned left, and it created the worst decision that they could have made. Because there's a fantastic idea here if they just turned right on a few more occasions and took a few more meta things. And maybe this was a bit early in 1935 to be too meta, but they could have leaned much more into the comedy aspect sooner and let you in on the fact that, no, there's something up here. There's something, this is a bit hokey. There's something going on. But by not letting the actors in on it, they're playing it as if they are doing a universal horror film. And then they find out they're not. So they're giving a performance for film that they're not actually in, which I don't think is fair on them. I don't think it's fair on the audience. And I think it just shows why Todd Browning didn't have a career for much longer after this. Freaks had already been a massive, massive flop. And this was not major success, but it was a bit more of a success because Lionel Barrymore was involved. And maybe out of context, we don't see it now, but Lionel Barrymore's presence as the headliner maybe tips the hat that it wasn't so much for horror, because he was not a horror actor. He was obviously, we've mentioned John Barrymore as part of the Barrymore acting dynasty. He's phenomenal when You Can't Take It With You, the great Frank Capra movie. He's the patriarch in that. He's Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life, one of the great villains in cinema. Who, if you think about it, even that doesn't tie up that film, because Mr. Potter does not get caught at the end of that film. He gets to keep the $5,000 and does not get shut down. Yeah. So even that classic's got problems with the script, but this just falls apart. It's 60 minutes long. There's 20 minutes been excised from it, but I honestly don't see that the 20 minutes could have saved it. I think that what's here is just, it would have fell to bits anyway. It's a massive letdown. I have to say, it looks great, but it's in the service of absolutely nothing, ultimately. I was very disappointed in the rewatch, apart from, and I keep coming back to Lionel Barrymore's performance. I think he's the only one that gets it. And I think he probably got it before they told him it was a comedy, because he just had better acting chops than a lot of these guys. He's also a much more fun performer. When he is barking orders at the servants and the staff and things, he's doing it I think he's doing it as a straight pastiche of Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing, just that particular version. But yeah, I think honestly, people should, I don't want to say avoid it, because I don't think it's, some people might get more out of it, and Lionel Barrymore is great, but I do think it's a letdown, and just more evidence for me to be a bit contrarian about someone who does get a lot of praise from a lot of people, but I just think Todd Browning's one of the most overrated early horror directors. And I think it's just that he lucked into doing something that started the universal cycle of horror films. And that's why he's so well remembered. but I don't actually think he deserves too much credit at all, because there's very little here. There's literally just one performance and some nice imagery, and even Bela Lugosi's terrible when he does have his lines at the end. The best thing you can do with this film is watch the trailer. The trailer has Bela Lugosi actually introducing the film and talking in character, and he's got more lines in the trailer than he does in the film. And I'm not that it's not even close, actually. It's a bit like that great trailer that Hitchcock did for Psycho, where he takes you on a tour of the set and acts as if it was a real life murder that had taken place and things. Bela Lugosi introduces it as Bela Lugosi, but a more kind of meta horror version of himself. And then he starts reading out the cast list in this Dracula voice. I mean, it's a bizarre trailer. So he's going, starring, it's a bit Count from Sesame Street, but you know what I mean. Starring Lionel Barrymore and me, Bela Lugosi. What is this? So maybe it would have been more clear at the time if you had Lionel Barrymore and then you saw that trailer, which is a bit camp, that it was going to be a comedy. But I just don't think that this film achieves anything that it sets out to do. And I think I remember liking it a lot more, and I don't know why now. I really don't know why. That's my big takeaway, is what was I seeing in this in years gone by? Was it just that I was such a stickler for, oh, look, it's got some great foggy sets and think, no, I don't know. Just now looking at it, critical eye, it's 60 minutes long and somehow still drags like hell. Don't know how they manage that.
Seems like it's 80 minutes long, actually.
Yeah. So, yeah, I just, it's one of the only things that, apart from when we've done, Secret Satans and things, but when we've intentionally said we're going to review something, it's one of the only times I've ever come on and said, I can't recommend this to people. I think any Monsters Den fan who likes classic horror cinema, yes, absolutely, 100%. But any Monsters Den fan that likes classic horror cinema, I can't recommend it. There's a chance you might find more in it, but I can't give a broad general recommend for it. So,
Dan, your take on the Vampire?
Well, this is one of these films that when they started coming out with these called these shock theater packages in the 1950s that would feature generally Universal, Columbia, Monogram horror films they would sell to the local television stations. And of course, then you had your horror show hosts. MGM did not allow this stuff out there into those general packages. It would pop up on television, but this was like a great elusive film when I was a kid. And your only hint of what was going on was Famous Monsters of Filmland. And if there's a still out there showing Lionel Barrymore, Lionel Atwill, and Jean Hersholt standing there looking like they're three vampire hunters. And that was something like, wow, this is cool. And it's Lugosi as a vampire. And then I never had really seen it unless you knew somebody that had a 16 millimeter print or something. And it didn't show up on television. And it wasn't until TNT came along, or Ted Turner, and he started showing everything in the MGM vault, in addition to Warner Brothers. And then all of a sudden you saw it. And like I said, at first it's like, okay, it's atmospheric. In the first time you see it, there are some atmospheric scenes going in the graveyard in the beginning, a little, hokey and such. But then as you watch it over and over the years, you start saying it's choppy. It is missing 20 minutes. It's missing something. And why would they go through this elaborate, like Paul Newman, Robert Redford, Sting,
yes, exactly. That's a good point.
This guy who murdered. I mean, it's not like they're fighting over the house. It's a dilapidated mess. It's not like there's some lost gold mine. They just want to find the killer of Sir Carol, which, adding to this, not only do they have this elaborate hoax worked up and not telling anybody that's what's going on, and apparently they said, everybody knew what was going on in the story, except the boyfriend who's useless. The main, he's like, he makes David Manners seem like Earl Flynn.
David Mann.
And and then on top of that, they get a guy to be like a body double for Sir Carol. And it's just they go through all of this to find out what. to prove there's vampires? I don't know. It does have, and it does have this, but give Bela Lugosi some credit. He didn't invent it. And he does have this scene where he runs at the camera when he's not lurking in the hallways or walking corridors in slow motion, which inspired the director of Blackula. When the woman comes out of the morgue and he's running at Elijah Cook, what's he called? Not the men's room attendant, the morgue attendant with the hooked hand, and she's running at him in slow motion, which is frightening.
You don't want to get those two mixed up, Dan.
No.
I'm just here to use the bath. Oops, daisy.
Whoops, but yeah, it's all over the place. Yeah, there were 20 minutes cut. It is true, the incestual thing, what I've been able to find out about the incestual thing is that it appeared in the original draft of the script. And as soon as they brought it to MGM and say, well, wait a second, this is 1935. People have to sleep in separate beds. Okay, we can't show things. We're going to all of a sudden bring up incest. What are you, crazy? This is MGM, which drove Louis B. Mayer nuts because he wanted to make wholesome pictures. So you're going to have a horror film. Let's throw some incest because everybody else has pulled it out. You've got this great cast. Lionel Atwood, who was at that time was under contract at MGM, doing a lot of supporting roles. But here's a guy that came off of Murders from the Zoo, Dr. X, Mystery of the Wax Museum. I mean, he's becoming and a couple of Poverty Row horror films. Got him. Lionel Barrymore, probably the top star, one of the top stars in MGM at 35. Gene Hersholt, who was, aside from having an award named after him, the humanitarian, had been like the wholesome Dr. Christian, a bunch of series. He was well known in Family Fare. All these, and they got Lugosi. And it just, you say, this has got to be a home run out of the park. And you leave the film and you go, holy shit, what just happened? And it runs like it's 90 minutes. It's interesting he's a hypnotist because the original title of London After Midnight was The Hypnotist of the script. And one of the more interesting facts at the end of the film is that there's apparently not a scene, but it was originally written and Browning said, that's not happening. Apparently the whole thing with the ruse was you never had the scene with Lugosi and Luna, his daughter, packing up their trunk. Apparently, Lionel Barrymore, at the end when they've solved the case, he gets a telegram from the actors he had hired to perform as the vampire and his daughter. They had been stuck in like some, rainstorm washout. They couldn't get there. So in actuality, there were real vampires.
That would have been a better ending.
That would have been a better ending. Now you have to understand this whole thing with this great performance, which the trailer is far more entertaining than the entire film.
Yeah, the trailer's the best thing about this film.
That's like Lugosi. That's almost like his speeches in Bride of the Monster. I have
hunted, despised,
animal, and that's great. But it's just it just falls flat. And he had actually given up because of the shooting schedule with Todd Browning. He actually had to pass on playing Dr. Yogami in the Universal film London, The Werewolf of London. He was supposed to play the part that went to Warner Oland. And that would have been an interesting concept to see him as Dr. Yogami. It proves the point that the whole story of London After Midnight, as much as people like to lionize it and put it on a pedestal and all this, other than the makeup, which is quite an achievement.
Yeah.
7, the film was not that. It made money because it was Chaney. But I would much rather see them find a blind bargain where he played like this dwarf, like had makeup like the early Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, with the kind of the ape's head and so forth like this. That'd be a greater find. And another thing is that Browning did not get along with anybody on the set. And as everybody knows, he liked to tip a little bit. And, especially after the failures of Freaks. I mean, he was definitely a silent director. You cannot say anything bad about The Unknown or some of the films he made with Chaney. They are classics. And, that established Chaney as, boom, as the premier man of 1,000 faces. But he would do during this film, when everybody would do a line, he was annoying everybody because he was saying, Lon would have gotten this in one take. Lon would have gotten this in one take. Lon would have did it a different way. So a lot of them eventually got annoyed with him, you know. But it's, yeah, you're a completist, get it. If you're a Lugosi completist, get it. If you want to be exposed to the world of classic horror, and this is going to be your virginal passageway, no, don't do this. There's a lot other, there are a lot better ways to treat yourself. You know, I have it in my collection. I'm a completist, you know, and if I'm going to have all the classic horror films of the 30s, it's like, you know, if I could live with Voodoo Man from Monogram, I could certainly live with Mark of the Vampire.
Voodoo Man is fun.
I like Voodoo. I'll take Voodoo Man over this any day of the week, and certainly.
I think I made Voodoo Man is just for the sheer coherency of the script sometimes. Not the film.
Although at least there was a script. I don't think there was one for this.
But Transfer is great. The one that came out on DVD a couple years ago, and then when it came out on VHS, when they unveiled all these in the 80s, you know, Fu Manchu, all the MGMs they put them, was the first time you could really sit and watch them in your home at the incredibly great price of like $79 a tape. Yep, the transfer of the film has even improved upon what it was, although the initial elements were very good. So from that aspect, along with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, they once again did a top-notch job of transferring and restoration. Kim Newman gets a little too overly excited for my taste sometimes, if you're listening to the commentary, but he's
Kim Newman.
Huh?
I love Kim Newman. Him and Stephen Jones.
So he's like a kid in a candy store. Yeah. Oh my God, they got jawbreakers, and he just goes into it, you know. But it's a well put together package, and if you're a completist, I recommend it. And once again, the price point, it's
yeah, I mean they're very affordable, so it's, you know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the only reason I could possibly. I mean, you say completist. There's so much Lugosi stuff that, you know, I don't think I'd want to be a total completist. I think the only complete part here would be, I think you just want to be a complete nutter to own this if you really needed it, to be honest, because it's just, I just couldn't recommend it to anybody on spec. I'd need to know very specifically what they were into before I could really recommend it. But if we support this kind of thing, it does tell Warner Archive, hey, we'd like more of this kind of thing. Just not this again, please. No. Never worry about 4K with this. You're okay, but you're all right.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Davey and I were talking before we started recording. It's like I've owned multiple copies of Mark of the Vampire over the years in different formats, and I've been watching this film for decades. And I've always had this kind of idea that Mark of the Vampire was actually a really good film for whatever reason. And so, you know, when this came out on Blu-ray and I picked it up, I was, you know, very excited that we were doing this episode. And so I've watched both of these, you know, twice each over the last week. And man, the first time I popped Mark of the Vampire in, and again, I hadn't seen it in a few years, you know, and I'm like, first of all, I never remembered it being so short. I'm like,
60 minutes.
Fucking hour, that's it. So I'm like, all right. And then I'm like, it's a pretty boring movie. And then I'm like, wow, you know, like Lugosi doesn't do anything in this movie. He's like, what is he in the movie? 5 minutes?
Oh, he's pulling a Christopher Lee, like in a Dracula.
Yeah, he's barely in the movie. And when he is, he just kind of shambles about, you know, walking around with the candle. And, you know, the actress who played his daughter, Luna, looks great. She's the creepiest thing about this movie. She's got like the white makeup, wearing the white long dress and the long black hair.
It's the ring, you know. It just looks like
she totally looks the part. And you know, David mentioned the one scene right in the middle of the film where they have the long shot of the you know, the big kind of living area in the house, and she comes like flying down with these like kind of like bat wings, but it's from so far away, and then that's it. The whole scene is like 3 seconds long. The atmosphere is there. It looks fantastic, but then they don't play on it at all. And it's just like such a missed opportunity. You know, they never explain, like I said, why Lugosi's character has this blood thing on there. You know, we talked about what we've read about how, you know, he tried to kill himself, whatever, but they don't explain anything. It's like, if you're going to cut it out, do something to get rid of that, because it looks ridiculous. And the ending is just, it's a twist ending, but it's just totally ridiculous. It's not believable. And it's just the fact that the killer went through all this to cover up his murder is just so far-fetched. And everything, you know, the whole scene where they explain where the vampire bites come from is utter trash. So they basically took a pair of tweezers that they pricked the neck with, and then they took a glass. Now, this isn't a glass, but
Yeah, and then they
took a
just
glass
heat it.
and they heated it up with a candle or a lighter or whatever, I forget what. And then they took it and went like this. And the excuse was that if you have a hot glass cylindrical object over open wounds, when you press it against the flesh, it forms suction, and that brings the blood out. What? Like,
Why they
hear that?
felt that they needed to add that rationale instead of just going with it anyway. Just, you know, we just use something to cut the guy. You know, it doesn't need a big explanation.
Yeah, it's just crazy. So for me, after having like such high praise of this film, or at least believing that I had high praise for this film all these years, I find this movie a massive disappointment. It's you know, one of you guys mentioned it's choppy. It is. It feels like there was lots taken out of it, and it doesn't flow at all.
There are scenes with Lugosi, like when he's walking with his daughter, okay, or certain things that you see with him. It's like, okay, you could build off of this
and they just cut it, and they don't do anything, right?
Like smirking and then goodbye.
Yeah, it's just.
But she is credited with having the first vampire hiss from the female vampire.
Yes.
You give her that much.
Yeah.
But
you know,
probably just sighing.
Yeah.
Why am
I? What am I doing?
Missed opportunity. Lionel Barrymore is great, but to me, it's a missed opportunity. And you know, Mark of the Vampire. It's really not a vampire film. Even if they didn't have the twist ending, there's just not enough vampire stuff in this film to begin with. But
do you know the only way this works as pretending it's a vampire thing is if this is one of our Amicus anthology little portmanteau pieces, and you know, you get that twist at the end, and then you haven't wasted a whole film on a nonsense twist. At least, you know, it's just one little part of a film.
Yeah.
But I can't stress this enough to anybody that hasn't seen this film. The plot of this essentially is that a murderer decides that, what's the best way to cover up that? I know, I'll pretend that vampires did it, and then the people that know who's trying to draw out the murderer, instead of just saying, well, vampires aren't real, let's just investigate this like real cops, they decide to just go along with the whole vampire thing and become vampire hunters themselves. It's the most bizarre. It's as if they go, oh, this is cool, we've turned into a group of vampire hunting people.
That's the other thing. The location of the film. It's people are speaking with English accents, but apparently it's I think the name of this, they were going to call it
Prague.
So it's apparently somewhere in Prague. They're all running around with Tyrolean leather shorts. They're dancing in the streets, but it's like 1935.
I was just going to say, we haven't even touched on that. This film takes place in the 30s. Not only was it shot in the 30s, the story takes place in the 30s.
Yeah, because
like it's Transylvania, 1785, right?
Yeah, when the villain's arrested at the end, Lionel Barrymore says, "Get the car and stick him in the back seat." You know, like, what? You know, so it's like the ending of The Village or something. I'm like, what's going on? I didn't realize this was a modern film. And again, I don't think the actors did. I think they were deceived, and I just can't imagine that went down well with actors of the caliber of Lionel Barrymore, that you can actually lie to him. You know, I mean, he was acting royalty. I mean, you might be able to do that in Poverty Row movies. You know, the director can treat us, but you know, we're talking big names of the day, as Dan said. And we've got Bela Lugosi, for goodness sake. And we know Bella take a paycheck for most things, but
Yeah, but
can't imagine.
he hated the end of this film. He was like, "This is
Yeah,
absurd." Yeah,
Well, they apparently kept
yeah.
hiding from him in particular. And when he found out, what am I doing here standing in front of a trunk? What's going on? And it was kind of like, then he was infuriated
yeah.
over that.
But do you know what I was thinking watching it? For the first time in the Monsters Den, I thought, no, I'm going to join Chris and Craig in this. I'm going to do an edit in this where I'm just going to add in loads of nudity and gore just to make it at least have something about it. Because this film there's nothing to it. It is the ultimate blue ball experience when it comes to everything about it tells you classic horror. And even though, and this is so bizarre, it's almost like that Mandela effect thing that Pete and I both remember this being a bit an actual horror movie in part that worked. It's almost as if there was a separate film that we've seen called Mark of the Vampire.
Hey,
That
what is this imposter here? Right? This
yeah,
is like what I remember.
because I'm sitting watching it going, I'm quite bored. And is it near the end yet? Oh my God, it's only been on for 3.5 minutes.
The longest hour of my life.
Yeah, an hour long. And somehow it is the longest thing I think I've ever watched for the Monsters Den.
These two films, it's so funny, is that the Mark of the Vampire here, we are realizing after multiple watches over the years and whatever history we've had with it personally, we realize, God, this is horrible. On the other side of the coin, with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which we all knew the groundwork was, this is a classic film. Its greatness shines through tenfold with this Blu-ray release. And that's what makes that a stunning, a great recovery act.
And maybe it's for the best that, as Pete said, we were really excited for some reason to put these together because we had it in mind that this was much better than it was. But maybe ultimately it did work as a double bill, because this is a Dr. Jekyll and this is very much a Mr. Hyde, because this is a monster of a film. This is an absolute beast. This has got the buck teeth and the simian look and the hair. This is the monstrosity wandering about town causing trouble. And yeah, I can't
It's
possibly imagine
the Malibu
what
classic car.
Yeah, I just think it's a real misnomer, and I hope that there aren't too many people out there that have been maybe got into universal horror in the past few years and caught up in vintage horror and have been fooled by this and gone out and bought it themselves and been really disappointed. I think that would be a real shame, and it might put them off some great performers because it is bad. It's bad. It's not even good bad. It's incoherent and sloppy and a mess and a disgrace and an embarrassment. But Barrymore's really good.
Yeah, he is.
He's having fun. I think midway through he realized there's something wrong here, and I think he started camping it up.
Yes, that's my take too. Is that he was smart enough somehow to know even before, because Todd Brown is surprise, guys. It's a comedy. I think he was smart enough to read the script and go, "This isn't a serious movie." No. I'm a Barrymore. I know one day.
For the worse. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Phoned up Ethel. Ethel, what do you think of this? John, what do you think? Yeah, the Barrymores know what they're doing.
They do. So there you have it, everybody. Our take on two new Blu-ray releases of two 1930s films. One an absolute classic. One we've kind of discovered after all these years that really isn't all that good. But you be the judge. Let us know what you think of these two movies. If you love Mark of the Vampire, hey, that's okay too. I hope you love this film because this deserves the love. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is the star of this show here today. So thanks for watching, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together.
All
damn time. Stay tuned next Thursday for more Monsters Den action. And we'll see you tomorrow morning at the Funhouse with Martin Popoff. And for Dan Brown and Davy Gallagher, I am Pete Pardo. Have a good Friday, everybody, and a good weekend. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah.